Hi everybody. For the Unit 4 learning objectives, we're going to be talking a lot about fair use this week and what exactly fair use is and how you can determine if something is or is not a fair use. We're also going to talk about DMCA, the Digital Millennium Copyright Act, its two provisions as well as some unintended consequences because of it. Also, we'll explain how the TEACH Act was needed because of distance education and the way to apply fair use to that situation. So let's take a look at some of these issues. As you read in the introduction, fair use is often the justification people state when they have violated the rights of a copyright owner. Fair use does exist, although you will see how murky the waters are in determining if something is fair use. Let's look at the part of the U.S. Code that created fair use. The entirety of Title 17 of the U.S. Code is on copyright. Let's explore Chapter 1, Section 107 of the Code in more detail. You may want to have a copy of the entire Section 107 in front of you at this point. It is shown on the screen. So let's look at the first part, okay? Notwithstanding the provisions of Sections 106 and 106A, the fair use of a copyrighted work is not an infringement in copyright. Okay, so that's the main parts of the sentence, and now we're going to go back and look at some of the clauses because otherwise this is really hard to understand. Okay, so they're saying that first of all, Section 106 talks about the bundle of rights that a copyright owner has. We talked about them in Unit 2. That would be the right to reproduce, to produce derivative works, to distribute copies, to perform the work, to display the work publicly, to perform the work by transmitting the audio. Okay? 106A reaffirms the rights of visual artists to claim authorship of the work they created and to prevent the use of their name in conjunction with works that they did not create. Okay? So it's basically saying while copyright owners have these rights, which prevents others from copying, using, performing their work without their permission, okay, there is a fair use for purposes such as criticism, comment, news reporting, teaching, scholarship, and research, which would not be considered an infringement of copyright. Okay, so let's look at the categories that are included as possible fair uses of protected material and define each of them. The Stanford page in your readings provides more elaboration, so please be sure to look at that also. For commentary and criticism, let's look at this book review in the New York Times. It's a review of a book called The Children's Crusade. Ann Packer is the author of the book. Katie Kitamura, however, wrote the review. The first paragraph introduces the reader to what the review is about, and it continues for several paragraphs, providing a synopsis of the beginning of the story. Okay? Then, the paragraph beginning with the word still that I have under the line, okay, includes several quotes from the book. You can see them in quotation marks. Okay? This is what is meant by commentary or criticism. Criticism means that someone is evaluating the product, in this case a book. Criticism can be positive or negative. The word criticize, it makes it very misleading, but it could be positive, it could be negative. Okay? So if somebody is using the copyrighted work of another in commentary and criticism for purposes such as a book review, that is one of the categories where fair use can exist. Okay? However, we're not saying that they can use the whole thing in their book review, etc. Okay, we haven't gotten to that part yet, but I just want you to understand the main categories. Okay. Okay, so this is a letter to the editor. It can also be considered commentary. This letter was published in the New York Times recently. The letter is commenting on a letter published in July 6th. It's linked there, okay? And Matthew LaRocque, the author of this letter to the editor, is quoting Timothy Egan in quotation marks, okay? Matthew LaRocque is attributing the words to the person who wrote them in the spirit of commentary, okay? So he's included that whole first paragraph Timothy Egan writes, okay? And that is considered commentary or criticism. So let's look at the other categories. Another of the exemptions under fair use is for the purpose of news reporting. Many people believe that any information constitutes news, but that's not true. Consider that news, according to Vudrag of the American Bar Association, defines news as following these guidelines. The important thing to remember is that information does not equal news. If you consider a newspaper, if anyone reads them anymore, or a live broadcast of the news, that's what the category of news reporting is. You'll note that the information must be for a legitimate news report on news that is fairly recent. So I'm going to give you a couple seconds to just kind of go over that to see what the news constitutes. Okay. Let's move on to research and scholarship, okay? Let's take an example. In the first example, I'm a researcher, a scholar. I'm studying the effects of viewing photographs on the brainwaves of the viewers. So I find photos of a car wreck, a cute puppy, a tsunami victim from the internet, okay? I copy the images to show my participants. I am advancing knowledge by completing my study. So while I'm completing my study, I am researching. Okay? After I've finished the research and have my findings, that's where the term scholarship comes in. Let's take a look. In this example, I'm reporting on the results of my research. Okay? Scholarship generally is reporting of research. In this example, after I completed my study, I wrote up the results for submission to a scholarly journal, okay? Kind of like the page that's on the right, okay? In my explanation of my research, I need to include the photographs I showed the participants so that my readers will understand the research that I did. This would be one of the permitted uses under the fair use provision of the copyright law. That is considered scholarship. Okay, let's move on to teaching. Okay. People often consider that anytime they're conveying information, it's considered teaching, but that is far from the truth. Okay. So let's take a look from the Public Counsel Law Center what teaching looks like under fair use. So courts have found that non-profit educational institutions, elementary schools, high schools, college, universities are engaging in educational uses of copyrighted works when they're using the works as part of a curriculum. Okay. Furthermore, courts often consider libraries, museums, hospitals, and other nonprofit institutions to be educational institutions when they engage in nonprofit instructional, research, or scholarly activities for educational purposes. So what they're saying is nonprofit K-12 schools and universities and colleges, when they are using copyrighted works to complement the curriculum, for example, if we are studying plate tectonics and I need to show some images, some diagrams, okay? I can take the diagrams from another work and reproduce them because I'm engaging in the curriculum. However, okay, You know how in elementary school, when the kids are really good, they get bribed by a movie, a Disney movie that they're going to get to see on Friday afternoon if they behave all week, okay? That's not curriculum. Therefore, that is not permitted under fair use. Now, I am not saying that they're doing anything illegal because the schools can be purchasing uh, public showing rights for movies. They can do this from a licensor, and it runs about $1,000 per school for a year, depending upon how many students you have. And most elementary schools do that. That's usually something the PTA ends up paying for. Okay? But that would not be considered fair use. Okay? Also note the word nonprofit in this definition. Okay? Um, Teachers' use of copyrighted materials is very critical to the understanding of fair use. Okay? Part 2 of this lecture is actually the written part, okay? And it talks about 3 pieces of legislation that actually have a big influence on what teachers can and cannot do in the classroom. Okay? I just need you at this point to understand teaching does not equal giving information. So not every use of copyrighted materials in criticism is fair use, okay? Okay. All fair use of materials for commentary, criticism, teaching, scholarship, research, and news reporting, okay, all of them belong to the subcategory of commentary, criticism, teaching, blah, 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 okay? So what I'm saying is just because something is in one of those categories does not mean it is fair use, because there's still another paragraph in that code that we looked at the beginning in section 107. So let's take a look further. So these are the fair use factors that are set forth in the U.S. Code. Okay. However, the courts first consider if the use falls into one of the favored categories that I explained earlier: the criticism, commenting, news reporting, etc. Okay. So once again, just because a use falls into one of these favored categories doesn't automatically make it a fair use. Okay. And here's where we get murky. Okay. If it falls outside of the categories, it could still be ruled a fair use. Confusing? It gets more confusing. Let's move on. Okay, so this is the second part of section 107, and these are the 4 fair use factors, which is what we call them. The discussions for this unit have you evaluating 5 hypothetical cases. And you're going to take each of the hypothetical cases and tell me if it favors fair use or it favors infringement. To help you understand what's included in each of these, please make sure you read the Stanford Fair Use webpage and the Copyright Office's More Info on Fair Use Before Posting. Both of those are linked as readings for the unit. Okay. So the courts will look at whether the use of a work, let's just say it's an image for the sake of clarity in this discussion, favors fair use or infringement for each of these categories. So, for example, let's talk about category 4. So, the courts would look at the effect of the use upon the potential market for or value of the copyrighted work. So, if it was an image, okay, and somebody reproduced it and was selling it for half the price of what the original, the real copyright owner was selling it for, would that have an effect, okay, on the market for that copyrighted work? Would that reduce the demand? Would that reduce how many people would pay for the item? If the answer is, in this case, if you're making the exact same picture, okay, and you're selling it for half the price, the effect on the market is pretty strong. Therefore, that would be considered to lean, and that's what we say, it leans towards infringement on category 4. Okay. You would then go and do the same thing for 3, 2, and 1. I want you to make sure you look at the Stanford page to see what each one of these includes. Okay. But the important thing to remember, there's no magic number of factors that need to favor fair use in order for the courts to rule that a use is fair. For example, if the courts rule, and they do go over all of these categories, if the courts rule that the use of an image favored fair use on factor 1, 2, 3, and 4, all of them, okay, the court could still rule that the use was an infringement, okay? You can never truly know if something is a fair use for sure until a court decides. If you are using an image, for example, you can state that you included it or you're reproducing it under fair use guidelines. But if the issue is taken to the court may rule that you infringed on the copyright holder. So it's important if claiming fair use of a work like an image to know what the courts have previously decided in similar cases. So let's take a look at that. This is how you can find the precedents that apply to specific fair use cases. Okay, that URL is to the government copyright website. This index is a great way to search through the fair use cases. Okay, so you go to the URL and then click on search cases, which I have highlighted in yellow. Okay, and you're going to get the categories that are on the right. Okay. So you can be much more specific in terms of it was a photograph, it was this, it was that, as well as what jurisdiction you're talking about, because clearly something by the Supreme Court will carry more weight than the 11th Circuit Court. Okay. This is updated pretty darn quickly after an opinion is filed by a court, so that makes it really useful. Okay. As I said at the beginning, part 2 of this lecture is actually written. You have to read it. It's in the unit and says lecture. Okay, it's the teacher's use of copyrighted materials. Okay, and there's also a section of Title 17 that is included in the module. Okay, I need you to look at both of those. That's what they look like when you're looking at the main table of contents for the class. Okay, so let's move on. Okay, let's move on to DMCA, the Digital Millennium Copyright Act. Okay, because of advances in technology, it was becoming easier and easier to pirate a copyrighted work. Okay, for example, DVD players easily copied DVDs. Video cameras were used in theaters to record first-run movies to post to websites. Music was easily copied. Software was copied. Copyright holders were becoming increasingly frustrated with piracy. Okay, so they began to build digital rights management, which is called DRM, into their products to prevent people from copying and distributing them. However, enterprising individuals and companies developed technologies to circumvent the anti-copying measures. Okay? The DMC Act made it illegal to circumvent these measures. Okay? It also provided a safe harbor for ISPs and their liability for work posted by their users. Let's take a look at this in detail a little bit more. Without the safe harbor portion of DMCA, sites such as these would not exist, okay? Because these sites, as internet service providers, would be liable for infringement by their users. Okay, so with Safe Harbor, okay, the ISPs are not liable for content posted by their users. Okay, if they promptly take down any work that a copyright holder says is infringing. Okay, so in order for immunity from prosecution, for example, for YouTube, because people post things to YouTube that are copyrighted, okay? So they'll make a copy of a song, a digital song, add some images, basically a very low grade music video, and they will post it to YouTube. Now, YouTube, for hosting it, would, before the Digital Millennium Copyright Act, would be liable for infringement. Okay, so can you see how YouTube would not exist if they could be sued every time somebody posted something that was an infringement on copyright? Okay, um, these types of platforms would never have been actual enterprises because that's just not viable. They'd be, getting sued every 3 minutes. Okay, but the DMCA provision for Safe Harbor said that they won't be liable if they promptly take down any work that a copyright holder says is infringing. So let's take a look at that. For example, I find somebody has copied content from my website, perhaps some artwork I created, and posted it to their Facebook page. Okay. I would send a notice of claimed infringement, okay, which is sometimes called a NOCI, N-O-C-I. I would send that to the owner of the website that's hosting the material, okay. So in this case, it would be Facebook, okay. And I would include a link to my content, and then I would include a link to the infringing content. Now, the ISP, in this case Facebook, will be immune from prosecution by me, the copyright owner, if they promptly take down the work. Okay? So, Facebook and other platforms like YouTube, they have actual parts of their site where you can go in and you would be able to file a notice of claimed infringement. I mean, they clearly go through a lot of these every single day. But if your work was found on another, like individual person's, you would send them a letter. And if you go ahead and just Google notice of claimed infringement form, you'll be able to see what some of those look like. Okay, so let's keep looking. So these messages look familiar at all, okay, because this is what had happened. The thing that was posted on YouTube at that particular URL, a takedown notice was filed over it. And you'll notice the different messages here kind of give you an idea of how big the issue was. Okay, so the bottom left one, the video is no longer available because this YouTube account associated with this video has been terminated due to multiple or severe violations of the copyright policy. Okay, so that's pretty bad. The top one tells you that the video is no longer available because Mad Descent filed a takedown notice on it. Okay. Do they have to investigate? No, they can just take it. They can just take it down. Okay, that's the problem. Let's continue looking at that. Okay. So there have been many unintended consequences of DMCA, and you're going to read about them in the article entitled "Unintended Consequences: 16 Years After DMCA." Make sure that you understand that there are 4 major consequences that were outlined there. And I need you to visit the Electronic Frontier Foundation's Takedown Hall of Shame. It has the most egregious current instances of misuse of DMCA, as well as some notable past cases. I'd like to highlight one of the misuses of DMCA by some large companies such as Universal Music. Okay? These organizations are using automated programs to scan the web looking for any of their copyrighted content. Okay? It's especially easy with music. Okay? The computer program then, when it finds something that belongs to the copyright owner, okay, it automatically files a takedown notice with the internet service provider. Okay. The internet service provider, of course, then has to protect themselves from liability by removing the copyrighted item. If you'll notice in all of this, no human actually made the determination that it was infringement. They just took it down. Now think about that. If you're playing 3 seconds of a movie as part of a teaching lesson, okay, and you posted it on your YouTube site, okay, they could file a takedown notice and your video would be removed, even though that would generally be considered fair use. Okay? The fact that it's being done without any human intervention is the problem. The Prince song Let's Go Crazy and the Dancing Baby at the URL on the screen, or just Google it to find it, include a teeny clip of the song while the baby is dancing. Okay? Lens posted this home video to show her son bouncing to the music. It's really cute. You can read more about the case in Lens v. Universal at the EFF, Electronic Frontier Foundation website. Those are the kinds of unintended consequences that were never, they never foresaw that these things would happen, but they have, and they have had and a bad effect in some cases such as this. Okay. So this is the end of this unit's lecture, okay? As I said, the discussion for this unit consists of 5 hypothetical situations, okay? You're going to be evaluating each of those 5 situations according to the 4 fair use factors and determining which of the factors are favorable to fair use and which are leaning to infringement, okay? If you have any questions about that, please make sure to post it to Hallway Conversations. But I do expect for each of the situations you're going to go through and you're going to read and stand for what amount and substantiality mean applied to fair use and decide if you think that case, that hypothetical situation leans more towards fair use or towards infringement, and post any questions you have after reading the readings. Our textbook has good examples and explanations of why something was ruled the way it is. That will give you a better idea of it.